Greetings. We continue today with part 2 of the destruction of the wicked from 2 Peter 2, 5 through 9. We're looking to Genesis chapter 7, verses 21 through 23. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beasts and of creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land, died. And every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowl of the heaven, and they were destroyed from the earth. And Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. The sentence of the first physical death was executed upon all the world system at once, except these 8 souls who were in the ark. This was a temporal judgment, and every one of these souls will still stand before God and face an eternal judgment. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 20 references when it says, which sometime were disobedient, when once the long-suffering of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was a preparing, wherein few, that is, 8 souls were saved by water. Now, right now, we're emphasizing the destruction of the wicked ones. However, it's being stated as the backdrop for Peter's assertion that God always preserves the saved before destroying the wicked. So then in 2 Peter 2:6, we find the immediacy of the perdition. It's set forth as Peter calls his third witness concerning God's judgment. And having turned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes by means of an overthrow, he condemned in judgment, having made and continuing to make them an example for those being about to be living ungodly. After the flood, Abraham then was the 20th, and Lot was the 21st generation inclusive of Abraham. It is only now about 391 years more after the flood that Sodom and Gomorrah and the other 3 cities of the plains had to be destroyed. When we turn to Genesis 11 and read verses 10 through 27, which we'll not take time to do here, we can glean the following names and numbers to establish a timeline between Noah's flood and the overflow of Sodom and Gomorrah. So we just have put it in narrative form. 2 years after the flood, Shem begat Arphaxad, who 35 years later begat Selah, who 30 years later begat Eber, who 34 years later begat Peleg, who 30 years later begat Reu, who 32 years later begat Serug, who 30 years later begat Nahor, who 29 years later begat Terah, who 70 years later begat Abram, whose brother Nahor begat Lot. In the book of Genesis 19:24, it says, Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. When you first read about this place, it says it was a well-watered plain. Now it's a deep valley after God's judgment upon them. Understand the scriptures are teaching that God brought the elements of hell and the eternal lake of fire into his immediate judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities of the plain, as well as the plain itself. In doing so, God reduced them to ashes and utter destruction. The Dead Sea is now the lowest point on the face of the earth. Note the legal terminology employed here. God, he pronounced a sentence against. The term means that God went ahead in present time and executed sentence upon these who were excessively guilty of living godlessly. As Genesis 18:20 and 21 note, And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it which has come unto me, and if not, I will know. Spoken for Abraham's benefit, because God already knew.